bringing us here safely this evening as we gather to absorb your word. May your Holy Spirit be with us and give us wisdom and encouragement as we study Ruth and see firsthand what faithfulness in you looks like and how your love for Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz is the same love you have for us. Open our hearts and our senses to increase our desire to know you and how much you love us. Help us to pay particular attention tonight to Boaz's role as kinsman and redeemer and how closely it mirrors your son Jesus' role as kinsman and redeemer for each of us sinners. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. So we're going to just start with a quick recap. We got through just the first chapter of Ruth, and there was a little question that came out on the side. I did promise to come up with a little more research, but we're going to, on the Moabite god Chemosh. Anyway, so going back to the first chapter, in the beginning, all right, Naomi and Elimelech leave Bethlehem for Moab. Why did they leave? Right. So we covered last week the tragedy of Naomi losing first her husband, Elimelech, and then her sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And then, of course, tragedy which also resulted for Ruth, Mahlon's wife, and Orpah, Chilion's wife. And then we see later on in the first chapter Ruth's loyalty to Naomi when Naomi returns to Bethlehem because she heard that the Lord visited his people and gave them food. So what did we see here just by that statement in verse 6? Once again, it was exactly right. And then Naomi offering her daughters-in-law the opportunity to return to their homes. And we see the difference in the two daughters-in-law, whereas Orpah decided to go back home after a little bit of reluctance, but Ruth faithfully clinging to Naomi. And with that, if we remember, what was also significant about not only that she just clung to Naomi and decided to go, what was it? She said, well, your God is my God. Right. Verses 16 and 17, right? The chiasm, your God, my God. Yes. And then Naomi and Ruth returning to Bethlehem just at the beginning of barley harvest, which was around April. So the significance of that return, let's go to that. The question came up. Linda asked a question last week about what God did the Moabites worship. And Ed gave me the big lifeline assist with the name Chemosh, who was the Moabites' national god. He was a savage war god. And we see references to him, and you can just write this down for yourselves and read this on your own. But in Numbers, chapter 21, verses 26 through 29, where you'll see the mentioned people of Chemosh, and also again in Jeremiah, chapter 48, verse 46. All right. So, questions or comments so far? We up to speed? Okay, let's dive in. We're going to read chapter 2, and we're going to stop at verse 9. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, Go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered, The Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, Whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink with what the young men have drawn. Okay, so let's stop here for a minute. So, who is Boaz? What do we know about Boaz?
He's wealthy.
Okay.
He's a landowner. House. A relative of
Okay. Anything else?
Was he from the bloodline of David?
He was from the bloodline of his mom. His mother was Rahab, and Salmon was the father.
From David. Maybe.
From
David comes. Sorry.
From
Boaz comes David.
yes.
David comes from Bethlehem.
Right. Okay. Now, the steps of the harvest, all right, just a quick recap of that is that you have, where is my, sorry. Gleaning is the gathering of leftover grain, all right, that falls when the reapers come with the sickle and separate, the stalks from the chaff. Now, what is the purpose though of gleaning, or what purpose does gleaning serve? Who benefits from the gleaning?
The poor.
Yes, right, exactly, the poor. We read in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy that that's a provision for the poor. So, what danger? Let's look at the question. What danger might there be for a young woman gleaning alone in the field? Okay.
There's no protection.
Okay, and what else? What am I not emphasizing here about? What do we already know about Ruth? All right.
She has no husband.
Well, not just that, but she's a foreigner, right?
Right.
So she's at risk of being treated differently, right? Because she's a foreigner, right? And so at this point, Ruth did not know many people, including Boaz. So how do you explain the fact that Ruth happened to go to glean in a field that belonged to Boaz? Well, that's kind of that's a fallback. That is a correct answer. But, I mean, let's go back, let's look at, we don't really know from verse 1 if Naomi actually, Naomi knew that, that she had a relative of Elimelech's. Boaz was a relative of Elimelech. And, I mean, we don't really know if Naomi actually told Ruth about it. It doesn't say, right? But divine intervention, all right? So if you look at the words in Proverbs 16, verse 9, all right, that the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. So we think that's what's happening here. So what impression of Boaz do we get as we, from what we just read? What?
He's very kind.
Okay. Would you say that maybe he was protective?
I would say righteous, yeah.
Okay. And we look even at the description in verse 1 that he was a worthy man. All right, he had social, legal, and economic status. And he had the respect. He had the respect of everybody who worked for him. And as we find out a little, as we dive a little deeper, that he has, you're going to see redeeming qualities here. You're going to see that he is protecting.
I got a question.
Sure.
What do you think the author of Ruth would imply by worthy? What would make an Israelite man worthy?
I guess that he was. I would guess that that he shows that he's faithful to God. Okay.
Faithful to God in Old Testament times. What do you do? Would he feed the poor?
Well, I think that because he's making opportunities for the poor. Okay. It's not, he's an employer. He's actually he's creating a livelihood, right? A way for people to make a living.
And this gleaning idea, feeding the poor is a worthy thing, who does it come from?
That comes, I guess that's Moses, right? I mean, it's in Leviticus. I had that down here someplace, and the apologies, folks. It's in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I lost my reference. Sorry. We'll tap that next week. We'll come back to that. Okay. What else did he learn? What about the way he inquired about that young woman was when he was referring to Ruth? And the question is, when he said, whose young woman is this? Right? He didn't say, who she was. What he was asked, what was he asking?
Where does she belong to?
Yeah, right. By whose authority, all right? By whose authority was she there? Okay. So in verse 6, he finds out more about who Ruth is, right? Reading 6 again. And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." So you see in this chapter, Ruth is called a Moabite 6 times, right? So it's clear that, she has an identity as a foreigner. She's known as a foreigner. But she's a foreigner who came after hearing God's word, all right? What happened in chapter 1, going back for a second, what actually happened? She was converted, right? Right? She adopted Naomi's God as her God. Abandoning what so she was, she became a believer. So she believed in God. So in verse 7, right? What else do we see about Ruth in here? About her work characteristics, maybe.
She worked tirelessly.
Yeah. And what was she working to?
For her mother-in-law.
Well, yeah. Maybe something else?
A husband?
Not yet. You're a little quick, We're getting there. But how about to the glory of God? And then in verse 8, it's kind of interesting. Here you get an idea. Now you get an idea in approximation, right? How old Boaz is, right? Because if you look in verse 2, Naomi says, "Go, my daughter," right? In verse 8, Boaz says, "Listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women." So we see that he put Ruth in a special place too, right? He was following, she was following his women, right? Ordinarily, people who were gleaning were usually the lowest status. They were at the tail end of the gleaning process. She got a place of favor here, right?
Favor and protection.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Questions, comments? Okay. Let's read on. We're going to go from verse 10 through verse 16. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So what's happening here?
He's leaving extra for her.
Okay.
To work so hard.
Okay.
He's treating her as one of his own.
Yeah, and actually, yes, the end of verse 9, right? Go, when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Now, what would have happened ordinarily there? Well, how would any foreigner be treated in this situation? Any other foreigner? Either shunned away or actually forced to do the work, right? To draw the water, right? To do that labor. So here you see that there's favor here. And it's not just, well,
he's a family member or relative, and he's taking responsibility at this point for the young lady.
Yes.
Who is by marriage into the family, and is followed the mother-in-law.
Yeah, we know that he's a relative of Elimelech. We're not really sure, exactly how they're related. I don't really think that that's called out here, but so before he actually encountered her, right? Boaz, right, only knew Ruth by reputation, right? She knew Ruth by reputation because of verse 5, all right, in verse 6, when we find that, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. So being a relative, he knew what happened, right? He knew the circumstances under, which they originally left and returned. How about verse 12? All right, what do we, what do we see here?
He tells us she's saved.
Yeah. Well, not just saved, but rewarded, right?
That's part of the reward. Salvation.
Yeah.
Why is God described as having wings?
What was the question?
Why is God described as having wings? The God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge?
Have anything to do with eagle's wings?
Maybe.
The cherubim.
It does.
It's protection.
Do you think it's literal, or is this more figurative language?
Figurative language.
What image is it conveying?
Her faith
Yeah,
was
shelter.
God's righteousness. In this particular case, even just like Abraham. She trusted. She had faith in God.
Yeah. That's it. So let's look at the significance of, and as we see the increasing favor, I mean, where it's shown a little further in verse 14, right? So, I mean, he's inviting her to eat and sit beside the reapers. The reapers are the men. They were, in the whole harvest hierarchy, they were the highest. So there's significance in that she's actually sitting with the reapers. Gleaners usually followed the women who bundled the stalks and the ears of grain together. So she's actually moved up in the hierarchy. Interesting, right? Questions or comments here so far? You said something in, as far as other kindness, right? I think that you went to that first in verse 16. All right? That she actually gleaned among the sheaves. And that's way above what normally what you would be required to provide for the poor under the law.
Where she could get at it, so she didn't have to.
Yeah, because ordinarily, what do we know? The gleaners just took what fell, basically, right? Here, they're actually, she's actually getting some choice grain in the process, right? Let's go to the rest of chapter 2. I'm going to take it right to the end if I can. Starting at verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted.' So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law." So now, I think this answered my open question at the beginning, whether Ruth actually, knew who Boaz was up front. Naomi didn't tell him. We see here that that Naomi asked, where did you glean? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So I think here it indicates that she didn't know that it was Boaz. But Boaz, in treating Ruth like a member of his clan, right? What do we think about that?
Seems he's taken a liking to her, especially when he found out that she was single.
Okay.
Eddie, where do you think
That's an interesting.
the interest came from, according to what the Bible tells us?
She was hardworking, faithful, respectful.
She took care of her mother-in-law, and she accepted her God.
Yeah.
She left her hometown for her. She left home. She left all her comforts.
Put herself at great risk being a foreigner and actually being very clearly identified as being a foreigner. Right? 6 times we hear it in here, in this chapter alone, that, she's a Moabite.
I'm concerned with being a foreigner. Did she dress different? And that's how they knew she was a foreigner, or did she look different? Because you can dress like Naomi and maybe look like a Jew, but there must have been a distinct difference in the way people would notice right away that she's a foreigner.
That's something I don't really know myself, but I would definitely stick a pin in that and see if I can come up with more.
Yeah, you're gonna probably have a difficult time finding a really good answer for that.
Okay.
There's one thing you did not say that might identify someone as a foreigner. What's the other indicator?
Accent?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to put it a little bit more down to earth.
Okay.
All right. 2nd chapter, 1st verse, Naomi says that her husband's kin, which is her husband's brother, is a man of wealth. So that means Naomi's sons are Boaz's nephew, and Ruth would be his niece, or niece-in-law. I don't know how to put that. Would you agree with that?
I didn't even look at it that way. Yeah, I can't wrap my head around that fast enough.
That's the case,
but
because she's related through marriage, not blood, because she is a foreigner, that he was taking her and treating her special. Oh, you're a family member, I can't have you do that, you be this.
yeah,
That's how I look at it.
there could be, I guess there could be something, something of interest there. Sure.
All right.
It's that's a good thought. I mean,
I have another wrench in the car.
that's pretty. No, that's not a wrench. I think it's actually a pretty plain way of looking at it, and it does cut through a lot. But we need to read on a little bit more. I mean, he could have done the same thing. He could have done the same thing for Orpah if she came, right? And she didn't come, right? She stayed behind. And presumably, I think we can say that she did not adopt God, right, as her God.
Probably went back to
she went back to whatever, whatever Chilean and them, or the family of Chilean believed. Or,
One more thing to add, that Ruth gave up. What was Naomi's concern about Ruth and Orpah going with her?
well, thank you. Thank you. This is, the other thing is about, Naomi says in chapter 1 last week, she said that she couldn't bear children, right? What's part of marriage, and what obligation do the in-laws have, or what is the desire of a wife, right? To bear children, to carry on the name, the family name, right?
So is it possible that Ruth may have been giving up the possibility for marriage, or to keep the line going here by going with Naomi? And is the sacrifice runs even deeper there?
You could be open to that possibility. Clearly, I mean, while it's not necessarily plainly stated, I mean, obviously her actions, yes, that.
She didn't go back to the safety of her family.
Exactly.
She took that chance in faith.
Yeah.
Her mother-in-law was okay.
Yeah. I mean, she trusted the judgment of her mother-in-law, who was faithful, and we see that, we see Naomi has her moments, all right? She's faithful, and then the other thing we remember about the end of last week was what kind of attitude did Naomi have towards the end of chapter 1? Do we remember? No. She was bitter, right? Mara, right? That's the name, that's a name for that name means bitter, right? So you can see a change. You can see a change in Naomi from hopeful to hopeless, and now here, maybe a little hopeful again. See how I'm doing with my questions here. So, I'm walking right into it. So why is Naomi excited when she hears that the Lord has led Ruth to glean in a field belonging to Boaz? Yeah. Looking up because...
She's being accepted by family.
Yeah. If you remember back to the end of chapter 1, where she's lamenting that, that she's rejected, she's feeling shame, right? She goes back to her home country, and she knows that God, she's going because that she knows that the Lord left provisions back in the land, that the famine was over, right? But now let's think about what she is. She's a widow, has no children. So how does like her society, how do her peers look at her at that particular point in time?
Were women subservient to men? And therefore, how could she get a workforce to work a field and manage it?
Yeah.
As a woman?
Yeah. Who had the rights to, she had no more inheritance, as Alan pointed out last week, right? She had no right to inheritance unless somebody redeems her, right? She's in a poor economic state. Prospects looking bad. Can't even offer, children to, children for her daughters-in-law to marry. She's already written off you know, the possibility of, you know, she's already saying that, you know, I can't marry again. I'm going to be way too old. By the time I have kids, you know, the kids are going to be, you know, they're going to be tots. You're not going to marry tots, right? So here, so the pendulum is swinging back, right? The pendulum is swinging back especially when Ruth discloses who it was that she worked for. I apologize that my synapses don't fire as quickly as yours do. One of these days. Well, no. But
How does it help us understand the meaning of the Bible term redeem, right? Isn't that what we're right now?
yeah,
So, I guess because his family, he treated her well, he gave her the respect, like you were saying, he made her worthy, respectful.
well,
You know, not
so what, yeah, so I mean, what kind of role did a redeemer have in that time? Right, what did a redeemer do? They bought back, you know, estates of deceased relatives, right? So Elimelech's estate is now in play, right? Because, you know, Naomi, without a husband, without children, had no right, no claim to the estate.
The Lord is now providing for her through Boaz.
I beg pardon?
The Lord is now providing for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like, you know, her faith is actually, you know, redeemed in this sense, right?
So we talked about Levirate marriage a little bit when we went through Matthew, right? You have
Right.
You have a verse there in Deuteronomy 25:5. What's the point of Levirate marriage? What's the benefits for the woman in Levirate marriage that God has made in Deuteronomy?
Let's go to that. 25:5. So if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her.
But here that's eliminated because there is no brother to
Right.
take over, and the husband is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as far as Boaz, he's an older gentleman.
Right, and we learned that because of the daughter, you know, the reference
He's a
both.
caring gentleman, and he's a godly man.
Mhm.
He tries to do what's correct.
But he really didn't have to by their law.
Mhm.
He did, just because if he was following what
Yes,
he just read, he really didn't have to do it.
That's right.
He did it anyway.
that's right, good point.
And what would the advantage be for Ruth if he were to do this? What is the point of Levirate marriage? Why did God make this rule?
For to be taken care of.
Who specifically?
The woman.
The widow.
Yeah, the widow.
The widow is taken care of and has a husband to work for her, sons and children to work for her, care for her. Basically, in this time, the family was the retirement plan.
Yeah. And in Ruth, right, there's now also that opportunity, all right? She wants, that she would bear a child and carry on Boaz's name. How is Boaz's name carried on before this? Let's find out. So the duties of a kinsman redeemer, all right? One of them is to buy back the estate of a deceased relative, which we covered already. Another would be buying back an impoverished relative who had to sell himself into slavery. Another would be receiving restitution for a crime whose victim was deceased. And fourth, avenging the willful, non-accidental killing of his relative by executing the murderer for whom there was no ransom. Well, the note here is that the fourth practice was probably replaced by due procedures in criminal courts during a monarchy. And here was another interesting thing that I didn't pick up on either. That's the Redeemer evidently also had the customary duty to assist the relative in a lawsuit. So what do we see in in verse Well, let's ponder this question. How does all of this help us to understand the meaning of the Bible term redeem?
It's a combination of things, it's not just one thing. It has to have those components to redeem somebody. It's the Bible term redeem. Is this Old Testament and New Testament though?
Well, yes, I know. This is, but
To me, it's just really different.
Can we say that the Lord always has a hand in it? And Boaz became the person who Ruth was going to be with, and then that was going to produce the grandson from Naomi, and down the line, David was to come out of it. And from there on,
Right.
Old Testament.
jumping ahead, but it's a great plan, yes, and that's we'll get there. We'll see the lineage in chapter 4 when we get there.
How would you describe the word redeem?
Made new.
What was that?
Made new.
Made? How about,
Cleansed.
I don't know, bought back?
So I think, maybe I'm lame, but I think of a non-biblical way to describe redeem, like redeem a coupon, right? There's a purchase.
Well, yeah, there's a
purchase element.
right,
to this,
right.
There's a
And
value associated when we talk about redeeming.
I thought it meant blessing. You're blessed.
Well, it's actually,
Supernatural.
I look at, well, let's look at, just Jesus' work on the cross, right? What did he do? He bought us back from sin, right?
If then I think it's a blessing back because you have the faith. That's how I see it.
Well, are you blessed when you're redeemed?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Separate the two, right?
I just put them together because I don't have another vocabulary word.
That's funny, but no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, you certainly have the essence of it. I mean, that's. But thank you for the more generic reference too. You know, as far as redeem as in the coupon, you know.
I keep thinking like lifting them back to their status, like bringing them back to what they should be.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, what happens every week when we receive communion?
You're forgiven. Your sins are washed away, so you're brought back to, you get to start over and try again. You get to do it again.
Right? I mean, that's,
We are redeemed by his blood.
yeah.
You can also say redeemed is being made new.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. Any other questions or comments? How about, let's look at verse 23 for just a second, okay? So, things are going good, right? And yet, and what's the significance of that last line? And she lived with her mother-in-law. What happens to people when they get a little prosperity or a little good fortune?
They move on.
They get selfish.
Yeah. Is Ruth selfish here? Right? She's still living with her mother-in-law. She stays faithful. She keeps her promise. She's gotten promises at this point. She's received them, but at the same time, she's keeping hers. She's staying faithful, right? She realizes that what she's got is a gift. And, you know, she's given something back.
And she promised me, if you die, I will die.
Right, exactly. Right, back to verse 16 and 17, which is probably, to me, it was is the best part of the chapter. You know, that's that whole thing about being saved, right? Adopting the belief of her mother-in-law as God. How about that for redemption? Right? Saved. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to try and go at least to verse 6. Let's try. I'm going to pick up at chapter 3. Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. Let's stop here for a second. So what is Naomi actually intending to do for Ruth here? What do we think? Yeah? Yeah, little matchmaking, right? Little matchmaking. You know, arranged marriages were customary for that time, right? So let's review the instructions that she gave to Ruth.
Well, they seem odd to us. Maybe that is the custom of the day.
They may also have been odd to
them.
the Israelites.
Well, think about,
That's a good question.
let's look at, in verse 3, right? Isn't she's basically giving her instructions to prepare herself as a bride, right? Wash and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak. Go down to the threshing floor.
But also told her way to speak, be subservient, honor. And that, I guess, in that way, that would be taken.
Okay?
It's a little sad to me.
Well, I'm wondering, is this, is this the way things normally went out doing? Is there some secrecy involved here? Is this kind of hush-hush, and why would it be hush-hush?
Because she's a foreigner, and because, the other young women would probably rather be in that place because they're working hard and they're not getting this in.
Well, it might just be viewed as it could also be viewed as a scandalous thing, right? It was, young Ruth. It's almost, and not to be too coarse here, but like the boss at work, right? Finding a secretary or someone, treating her with favor after. I mean, if you're in a workplace, how would you view that? How would you view that?
Get rid of
But I think when you say, why was it done that way, it could be out of respect for Boaz, not to where she's trying to seduce him or anything like that, as you would say, the wrong way, but trying to, follow what Naomi said in a respectful way, lay at his feet. She could have cuddled up next to him.
Right, and we see that, there is, that
And
doesn't.
this way, it was out of respect.
Well, what I should do is,
Go away, if she stayed, it whatever would have come of it.
the real
Honorable man.
place for me to stop tonight is to take this all the way to verse 9, because this is where we find out a little bit more about what the intention here is. So let me, with your indulgence, I'll just read these last 3 verses. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." So let's just back up for a second and that action of uncovering of Boaz's feet. What about that maybe Ruth is, proposing marriage, right? We say a little bit more in verse 9, right? I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer.
calling him to task.
Yeah?
There's a lot about the feet. There's certain, like in the Old Testament, there's a lot about feet.
Well, yeah, we uncovered the agreement, and we're gonna do that.
I don't get it.
Pastor put some light on that in our Matthew study.
Well, I know about them touching Jesus' feet, knowing that he was.
Okay.
But there's like, feet is very significant.
But the act of removing a sandal, right? That was how an agreement was completed in those days.
Right.
All right. Basically, the act of taking off a sandal and putting and the person who's buying, right, said, here, put your foot here. All right? Now it's yours. That's part of it. Something?
Keep going, keep going.
In the Good News Bible, the translation on that line.
Okay.
Okay, now, where you said, put your wings over me and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
In the Good News Bible, it says, it's Ruth, sir, she answered, because you are a close relative. You are responsible for taking care of me, so please marry me.
Right.
In plain English.
Now, how does that match up? Go back to chapter 2, right? And verse 12. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So, what happens, all right, is that when we look at marriage, right, a wife finds rest under protective wing of her husband, right? Just as Israel finds rest under the wings of God, Yahweh. Well, I don't want to keep anybody here any longer. We may actually get to finish this next week. We might actually be on course. I tried to be a better steward of time this week, so. Any questions or comments? I know I have a couple of things that I have to try to come back with next week. I'm sure there are some open issues, but we will come back to them.
I would just add one more thing.
Sure.
I think it's very, very significant that, Boaz is talking about God spreading his wings on her. And Ruth, the foreigner, using the same analogy to describe Boaz. Basically, Ruth might be saying to Boaz, God has put you in my life to do what you said. Right?
Well, we're going to, and we're going to find that his intentions are good. I don't want to give anything away, but there is a little condition attached to that. But we're gonna tap that at the very beginning of next week's study, because it's in verse 13, I think, is what we're talking about here. So. Let's close in prayer. Bow your heads. Dear God, we give thanks to you for this discussion and opportunity to share your word. By your Holy Spirit, open the eyes of our hearts so that we may see you caring for us through those around us. Through your gospel promises, work in us so that we follow the example of Naomi, Ruth, Boaz, and our father in faith, Abraham, who waited patiently and received what was promised. Please keep us all safe this week, and we now pray, as your Son taught us, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thanks for coming out. Have a great week. Stay safe. Stay healthy.